Well, earlier today, President Trump addressed the nation and made a series of claims about the 2020 election based on newly declassified documents. And one of his central arguments was that China has possessed or analyzed more than 200 million US voter records, presenting that information as evidence that the 2020 election was vulnerable and that we need stronger federal election laws. So let's separate what the documents actually say from what they don't. So I'm going to do a fact check. Fact check number one: China's access to US voter data. Mostly true, but not completely. It's missing some critical context. The newly declassified records do indicate that US intelligence concluded that China has collected and or analyzed large amounts of US voter registration data. However, what the president did not indicate is that these documents are actually publicly available. So let's take a look. When you go to whitehouse.gov, you are able to quickly access the documents that have been released. And there are various ones, and I went through some of them. Some of them I was not able to open, but I found some interesting ones that I want to share with you. So, first of all, on this one, which is from sometime in 2022, this document does indicate that voter registration data is actually publicly available, um, which is actually factually true. Most states do have publicly available voter registration data. Some of them do not. And for those that do, the majority of them, you do have to pay for it. And it's oftentimes limited to people who are candidates in an election or perhaps are doing some type of voter or polling research. But it's not just publicly available for anyone on the internet to simply download. Most of the time, you do need to have a legitimate reason for wanting to obtain it, and you also have to pay for it. But this document indicates that the voter registration information from 2013 through 2021 is publicly available for download. And it does appear that the information that was obtained was from Colorado, Connecticut, Florida, Michigan, Oklahoma, and Rhode Island. So President Trump, in his claims, was not very clear on this, and actually, I felt was misleading in leading people to believe that that information had been obtained through some illegal means, when actually the truth of the matter from the documents themselves is that it's publicly available. Other things that I found interesting in these documents. The documents do not indicate that votes were altered. These documents do not seem to show, however, is that there were any altered votes. Here is a third document from the CIA. This document is regarding data from 2018 through 2020. So this would have been when President Trump was first in office. And again, it's a summary of activities by the Chinese government. None of these documents indicate that there was an alteration of votes, a manipulation of voting machines, or that it changed vote totals, or that China interfered with the technical administration of the 2020 election. Instead of anything, they reinforce what the intelligence community has already before made public, and that it has concluded in 2020 and in 2021 that China collects intelligence, it has been analyzing American voter information, and that it seeks to understand public opinion. While in this document, which was actually published online on the 1st of July of 2020, so this is publicly available information. Once again, the document indicates that the intelligence community has detected Chinese state sponsored cyber actors targeting the former vice president's presidential campaign, that it's conducting cyber espionage against other US election related entities, but it does not anywhere in the document indicate that votes have been changed or that machines have been compromised. Now, For my second fact check, the presence of a deep state. President Trump also points to a deep state several times in his speech. He argues that analysts underestimated China's influence and or even deliberately kept that information, or that dissenting views were not given sufficient consideration. Let's recall that in his first term, the current CIA director, Radcliffe, was actually the DNI, or Director of National Intelligence, during the first administration. So it seems illogical that his own DNI would deliberately keep relevant information from the president, considering that the president has promoted him in his second term to CIA director. The newly released documents do support that there was a genuine internal debate in the intelligence community over how China's activities should be characterized. Some interpreted the intelligence as less significant in terms of an influence campaign, while others had alternative analysis. And in this document, this is an email between intelligence officials. There is a conversation about presenting a different type of analysis that had different conclusions from the majority opinions, and that the purpose of this alternative analysis was to present the president a more honest analytical difference, or at least a bigger holistic view of everything that was on the table. So, once again, the documents themselves indicate that there really is not a conspiracy or deep state by actors in the government to suppress relevant information. Rather, former DNI Radcliffe, now director of the CIA, his own memorandum on the assessment of China's activities in respect to our elections indicate that China did not alter any votes, manipulate any vote counting machines, or hacked any voting machines. And here is that report from the intelligence community, and here is DNI Radcliffe's opinion, indicating that in the end, there was no evidence of any kind of altered votes, manipulation of counting systems, or hacking of voting machines. To our fact check number 3, influence is not the same as interference. And this is really a very important distinction that is very relevant. The difference between foreign influence and election interference is that influence means attempting to shape opinions through propaganda or social media or messaging or information campaigns, whereas election interference means manipulating the election itself through the change of votes, tampering with voting equipment, or altering certified results. There are no evidence in any of the documents that this happened. On fact check number 4, that 278,000 non citizens are illegally registered to vote. President Trump said that in a DHS review, there had been an identification of approximately 278,000 non citizens who have been registered to vote in federal elections, although it's not clear how this finding was reached. And this is the document that is presented among the documents that were dropped earlier today. It seems like a very plain document. There really doesn't appear to be any kind of security label on it. And to be honest, it almost looks like something that could have just been created on a simple PC. Also, the document here actually indicates that it's 28,000 non citizens. However, President Trump in his address indicated that it was 278,000. Again, the document does not indicate how these numbers were derived. However, no evidence is presented to support that fact, or allegation, I should say. And my final fact check number 5, China has manufactured illegal driver's licenses and illegal ballots for fraudulent mail in voting. So, in a memo from August of 2020 from the FBI's Albany, New York office, This is the document. There is a source that comes to the FBI that claims that China has hatched a plan to send thousands of fraudulent driver's licenses to the United States for the purpose of casting mail in ballots. However, the driver's licenses were to include actual personal identifying information of American citizens, and that information was going to be obtained through TikTok accounts. The report, however, doesn't go anywhere into how that would have happened, and the report actually dies on the vine. As the agent notes here in his comments, TikTok does not hold or keep user addresses. So the allegation itself seems to be kind of off the wall, and for that reason, this report really doesn't seem to go anywhere. Now, why does all this matter? Well, reasonable people can disagree about whether Congress should strengthen election security. That's a reasonable debate, as well as whether we should have stronger protections for voter registration. These are very legitimate policy debates, but policy needs to be built on evidence. And if intelligence documents show foreign intelligence collection, then we should call it intelligence collection. And if they show influence operations, then we need to label it as a influence operation. If they show election manipulation, then we need to be very clear that we are calling that election manipulation. These are not interchangeable terms, and conflating them does not strengthen public confidence in our government or elections. Rather, it weakens it. For this matter, facts and distinctions matter. And if we're going to have an honest conversation about election security, we need to be willing to separate evidence from what we believe certain things may be out there and what documents may imply. We need to look at them for what they are. So, for that reason, I've given you a little preview on some of these documents and how they align, or rather, don't align, with President Trump's allegations of earlier today.